Welcome to Moment with Africans. I am your host, Aina Hiadura. In this program, we explore various aspects of the African experience: culture, history, religion, economic development, and migration. We showcase the diversity of experiences that make Africa unique and rich in culture. We begin on a somewhat somber note by taking you down the dark path of history to the transatlantic slave trade, but from an African perspective.
Slavery existed in Africa before the most popular slave trade ever that took place in West Africa.
The emergence of slavery was an outcome of European explorations for economic and religious purposes.
You hear the stories of how the slave trade ships tried to avoid the different colonial armies that were trying to stop this trade.
Some locals were sold as properties into the New World.
Enslavement was seen as sort of an economic opportunity, which some African leaders, engaged in. For them, part of the business that occurred in the same period, in addition to other forms of trade. So it would be wrong to look at it in terms of Africans selling other Africans.
So even powerful African leaders, right, didn't use their power the right way. And because they didn't use their power the right way, and they thought they could get rid of tribes that they were warring against.
People who were in debt could be, enslaved, right, to others. People who were war captives could be enslaved. People who committed crimes could be enslaved. But those forms of slavery was not a permanent status.
Your social place does not dictate whether or not you should be sold or or used as pawns in the slave trade. So it's like, well, they were poor people, so we went ahead and traded them. Or they were not very useful to us, so right, we went ahead and we let the slave traders take them.
The Atlantic slave trade provided opportunity for those people who otherwise would have been retained within the African, social systems and structures, to find an avenue within the Atlantic. So it did exacerbate or transform already existing institutions of servitude within Africa. But people did get engaged with other forms of, capturing or enslaving people, including wars which were, sometimes encouraged by Europeans in order to generate, enslaved people.
Because America's shine came from the hundreds of years of free labor that they got from slavery. And so this country was built on the back of slaves.
A very unequal exchange, because human labor, millions of Africans were moved into the Atlantic world to produce, the wealth that led to the emergence of capitalism and wealth and industrial revolution for European societies. On the other hand, Africans were exchanging human beings for goods that were not leading to any further production, like alcohol, guns, gunpowder, mirror, cooking pot, stuff like that.
Who do I blame for the slave trade? I blame everybody involved. Whether you were the buyer or the seller, right? If it is hurting people in the process, I blame everybody involved.
As an Africanist, it would be difficult to argue that the slave trade would have started if the Europeans did not engage and encourage it.
Communities where slave trading took place remained desolate and poor.
We have no idea of how many Africans were enslaved into the New World. And if we're thinking in terms of the human capital that was moved out of the continent, that of course had its own consequences.
The descendants of those slaves are the present-day African Americans, rewriting history from plantation to wealth with countless success stories.
It happened, get over it. On one level, is what you're saying with slavery. But the Holocaust, you want to have celebrations and give tours and and do all this other stuff where the Holocaust is concerned. But slavery, oh, it's over, it's done, it was generations ago. Why are you guys still talking about it?
There is a difference between historical slave trading and the modern day human trafficking.
If Libya was a stable society, it would be much more difficult to engage in this sort of underground, criminal businesses and activities that we defined broadly as modern day slavery.
What I would say to the people in Libya during the slave trade is, did you not learn anything from history? Did history not teach people anything about how wrong this is?
No matter what it is, let's put an end to slavery.
You're watching A Moment with Africans live from Milwaukee PBS. Hopefully you learned something new about the transatlantic slave trade. Let's move to the topic of the day. Is economic development the reason Africans are migrating to the West? Some scholars have suggested that if African countries were thriving economically, Africans would not look to the West as some kind of financial mecca. I have two African professors here to comment on the link between economic development and migration. Dr. Abera Gellan, Associate Professor of Political Economy and Public Policy, Department of Africology, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And Mr. Fesahai Mebratu, Executive Director, Pan-African Community Association. Welcome to Moment with Africans.
Thank you.
Mr. Mebratu, as an expert on African migration, why are Africans migrating to the West?
For Africans, we have to see the migration from its roots. Initially was a forced migration, as you mentioned, with the slave trade, but after the colonial era, Africa was divided according to colonial powers, not by the way it should have been, but the way the colonizers divided for themselves. For example, they divided it where people should have been together, were divided, people should have been separated, were put together, a recipe for conflicts. When Africans became state nations in the 1960s, the dictators that came as new government did not really keep the promise. So conflict started. The conflict became the issues of migration and displacement of people. That is the starting point. That starts in the 1950s, 1960s.
Dr. Gellan, are African leaders the cause of the current economic problem that the continent is facing?
I think in part, but I don't think they're the main reason for why Africa has not developed. It's very complicated. It goes back to the colonial powers, like Pasaya was saying. Africa is a new continent. Before Europeans came to Africa, Africa looked totally different. In fact, before 1957, there were only 10% of Africans that were independent. Before 1957, actually, only 2 nations were independent. The rest was colonized. Most African countries got their independence in 1960s, after 1960s. So African nations are brand new nations after colonial powers. When the European colonials left Africa, they created a totally new country, new African countries. For example, some people in Togo, they have ethnic groups related to them, maybe in Nigeria or in Ghana. The boundaries was totally different than it was. So, as a matter of fact, when in 1960s until 1970s, when Africa got its independence, the highest level of development in Africa happened then. The problem then was so multifaceted. There was so lot of problems. Definitely leaders have a play to role, but the problem is much more complicated.
Mr. Mebratu, if African countries became as economically stable and began to thrive in the same way that first world countries are, do you think that will stem this mass exodus that we are witnessing?
I don't think so. Let's take the first American-educated African scholars. A lot of them came here with the idea, and even most of them went back and became leaders. So every African after the independence was to develop their own country. It was later on because of bad governance that became destabilized. Also, we have to understand the way the African country infrastructure was designed. It was not designed for internal development, but it was designed to exploit the resources. So that in itself, the initial design was not meant for the development of Africa. That might be probably the root, but Dr. Galan knows more about that than I do. However, at least those are the issues that we need to pay attention before blaming the migration and the displacement that we are facing right now.
Indigenous African religion tends to be cast in a negative light, especially when placed in relation to Western religion. We decided to go in depth to find out why. Take a look.
In terms of African tradition as such, Africans, as we know, did not have written texts. So the God-name within the African aspect of it, it goes in terms of the word of mouth, the passing of tradition from one generation to the next.
Outsiders often refer to African religions as pagan practices.
There is no right aspect and there is no wrong aspect within these aspects, within each culture. The only individuals you will find who will come in to say, when they look at carved objects, when they come in and see therefore now artistic objects, when they come in therefore now and see wooden objects and say it is wrong, it is the Christian, it's a European notion, European idea.
In indigenous religions, there are many gods that intercede on their behalf, while the Pentecostal Africans considered them to be evil.
Exodus chapter 20 verse 3, that we should not have other God before him. So if we get off from his line and go and worship idols, it's against God. There is a consequence to it.
They believe there was a sun god. And this sun god, within the spirit also, we have seen the sun god now that created almost every aspect now. Sun god also moved on again to create again another god below that aspect. All of them linked to the sun god, they are called a Martian goddess. So the goddess therefore, the Martian goddess, or God therefore of balance, God of justice, God of equity, was being created also, had powers also right there from the sun. And Egyptians therefore now hold this very much as part of their traditional religion.
1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 23, that rebellion is like a witchcraft.
Some people hold that there is no witchcraft. Some may say there is witchcraft, but all those aspects, it dies now in terms of the belief of the people. How do people see it them? How do people see it themselves? What do they think about it? Do they believe it's witchcraft or it's not witchcraft? And in most cases, witchcraft might just result due to ignorance.
Worshipping the ancestors, these are the idols. These are still idols because it's part of what the idolatry is. Worshipping the men. It's not only trees or and it's anything that we put more important than God.
Mali, you have another god there for now within Mali, the Dogon, D-O-G-O-N. For the Malians, look at this, your own god, you find an egg.
And for an egg, then, an egg has all the properties of life that you can imagine. Therefore, now, though the linked in terms of that egg, therefore, had power in terms of the four corners, east, west, north, and south. They believe that this egg, therefore, has all the ingenuity to be productive.
It's possible, to generate something from our ancestors. It's possible if the person is not delivered. Because, like, for example, the foundation, the ancestors, they used to commit adultery. There is tendency for the generation in that family, to be facing something like that.
There is nothing like a generational curse. If you go down now, it may affect only in terms of, it's a way of thinking. Japan definitely a way of thinking. If they move therefore in terms of that aspect of thinking, they move down to find out the root cause of it, why this event is happening, they'll be able to look at it, they'll be able to find a cause for it, or look for a solution how they could solve it.
Believe that God has set you free, because he that the Son set free is free indeed.
We need to be very specific about countries and ethnic groups, right, when we're talking about African people and their traditions. The other piece, too, is to understand that African cultures are dynamic and they're not static, right? So just like in the West, right, in Western countries, in the U.S. in particular, our cultures are constantly evolving and changing.
These are secret societies practiced in Mali and Sierra Leone.
Secret societies are an important part of the Sierra Leone culture. The most popular men's secret societies are Poro, Wende, Buraba, and Oje. And the only secret society for women that I know is the Bondo Society.
The reason they're secret societies is because you don't give out information. They're a lot like what you would consider the Elks, the Masons, the Shriners.
So the Donzo hunters in Mali, and they are healers, they are diviners, they're animists, they are hunters. They're highly revered in their communities.
Female genital circumcision is a controversial culture in Africa due to what human rights organizations see as a violation.
The Bondo Society is a rite of passage for young girls from adolescence to womanhood.
Like Vodun, it's a religion, but you see on television it's voodoo, it's something negative, but it's a healing tradition,
There is the Chiwara Society, and the Chiwara Society is a farming-based society that is comprised of men and women, and the function of the Chiwara Association and the Chiwara Society is to safeguard farming practices.
It has been banned in some African countries, or it can be done with the girl's permission at 18.
The initiation is female circumcision.
They're traditions that you grow up with. They're traditions that maintain your character. They tie you to your family, your culture, your country. And they have value in terms of the development of your personality.
They do teach the young girls about marriage, motherhood, and proper behavior, and how they will become productive part of their communities.
Mixed feelings linger in the minds of some Africans about their culture, while others see it as pride and heritage.
Some Africans feel that their culture doesn't have worth, and it does. And a lot of that has to do with the religion that was brought to the continent, because they were told that they have to give up, their traditions, whether it's traditional religion, whether it's traditional healing, whether it's, just the cultural norms. They're told that that's savage and that doesn't have meaning or value.
And so the Boichi is a female-based association that is focused on farming. And so it can be seen as an association or a female farming collective where women come together and they take turns farming on each other's land, so that by the end of the planting season, everyone is ensured to have, food.
If they think, that Bondo society is inappropriate, I think the teaching should come from African women who have gone through the ritual, and those that are doctors or scientists or researchers that knows, what it is all about, that they can teach the other women in the community or in the villages the positive and the negative side of the initiation.
Welcome to Moment with Africans. You have heard from both practitioners and critics. Hopefully you learned something about indigenous religious practices and beliefs in Africa. Let's continue the conversation. Is economic development the reason that Africans are migrating to the West? Mr. Mebratu, is immigration helping Africans?
Immigration is helping Africans only with the aspect of remittance that they pay back home. Other than that, the African countries is having a brain drain. So it could be explained both ways.
Dr. Gellan, how do you see the present state of Africa's economy? Is it growing?
African is actually, as a continent, is growing right now than ever before. The problem is not only that it started growing, the threshold is so low for Africa to make a difference, to have development. It needs to accelerate much higher and faster.
Mr. Mebratu, is the immigration system fair to African immigrants?
Until 1980, the Immigration Act, Africans were very few of them coming to this country. Even after that, though the number has increased, now we are about almost 2 million first-generation Africans. We make only 5% of the whole immigrants combined.
Africa is a continent with a rich culinary culture. You need to see it, feel it, taste it to understand it.
The freshness of the food without being preserved, it's very, very healthy. It's like you eat food, you don't put chemicals in your body.
The food is actually natural. They don't mix it with all the kind of chemicals that make people sick sometimes, make people fat.
We have a variety of spices that we use on a daily basis, such as cardamom, cumin, clove.
Something called cassava, plantain, cocoyam, different kind of food. And this food that we have, you can prepare in many different ways.
Cabbage to spinach to some of them, the names you are not even familiar over here. We have what we call chicha, and that's other countries they call dodo.
I would say foo-foo is a common food. You can use spinach and make stew to eat foo-foo. You can use a goosey stew to eat foo-foo. Palm soup.
And makongoro is basically the cow legs. So you boil those until they are really, really soft, and you put maybe a little spices. We see food as a love language. We use it to show love and appreciation to each other.
Maybe you can try cooking some African food sometime. Our topic of the day is economic development the reason Africans are migrating to the West? Dr. Gillan, what's the way forward for economic development?
Well, the fact is, at this time than ever before, for nations like Africa or other less developed countries, there are more chances to develop. We see that in East Asia. Not only develop fast. Africa is no exception. So Africa has a lot of problems of its own. But can Africa develop? Of course, Africa can develop and can develop fast.
Mr. Mebratu, what is the success and failure rate of African immigrants?
By and large, Africans are the most educated group in this country than anybody. We have over 41.7% of the Africans are college, 4 years college or over. So the African income here is over $55 billion, according to LA Times. And $15 billion we pay in taxes in this country. So we are very highly educated and contribute a lot from a professional to labor market in this country. So this has to be understood. And we are also very highly motivated to succeed. At the same time, we do not forget our continent. We are always looking back towards Africa and trying to invest if there is a conducive environment.
Dr. Gillan, what do you think of aid as a solution to Africa's economic problems?
African economic development definitely is not the major aspect of development. Development means that the average person in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Sierra Leone, everywhere, has the power to change everything that's good for him or her. And that relates to education, that relates to health, that relates to many other aspects that people like in the United States have and to create that. Foreign aid can be useful, and it could also be detrimental. It really depends on the national leaders of African countries. Some looters obviously use for their own, but it could also be helpful if there are policies, there are missions that is laid down specifically for certain countries. It could be part of the African countries lack capital, and therefore it can substitute for the lack of capital. It is definitely has to be part of the package of development issues, development programs.
Mr. Mebratu, do you have any advice for African immigrants?
Number one, here we have to motivate the young generation to be educated. Education is the key, because there is a challenge. The first generation Africans do well, but their children or their grandchildren have challenges to fit in. So education is the key, but at the same time, make sure that be rooted in your culture and your values, and look back to the continent for those values.
Dr. Gillan, do you have any advice for African leaders on how they can build the economy?
Oh, I don't think anyone can listen to me. I think the question is, we need to change the system in each of African countries that becomes viable for leaders in Africa. It's not only the president or the secretary of state or the prime minister. It's to create chances for the African people. Development is not only economics. Development is change practically in a number of ways, different things, just like it is here in the United States or in Europe or in Canada. And the development is done by the people. Obviously, leaders have a very critical role to play. As long as we keep the system that has been there for many, many years, leaders cannot be born from that system. The system is the one that really gives chances for leaders to be leaders, to identify problems, to solve problems, to galvanize the people and make fundamental transition from the kind of economics that we have to the prosperous, industrialized, where every single person, single average person in African countries has the same opportunities as people in developed nations.
All good things must come to an end. Thanks to our wonderful guests and partners. Thank you for watching. To end on a happy note, here is a quick look at traditional wedding practices in a selection of African countries. I am your host, Aina Hiadura.
Families would go out of their way to make arrangements for a son to pick a bride-to-be, or a bride-to-be to get a groom-to-be. That process was and remains very delicate to make sure that the young girl and the young boy are going to be in a union that's going to be safe for both of them, that's going to ensure that they are going to thrive financially, that they are supported by their communities and their families.
The traditional marriage is significant, particularly in my culture, because it's seen as the glue that holds everything together. No parents will allow their daughters or even their fathers to allow their sons to go and get married in the church if they have not done the traditional part of it.
They watch your behavior as a young girl. How do you talk to grown-ups? What is the way you dress? Your physical appearance, your shape. You know, as an African, they'll look at your shape. The older generation can look at a woman and tell you, this woman will be a good childbearing woman. This woman will not be a good one. I don't know what they base this on, but it's the African way of things.
You have to prepare the home, the furniture, and when you come to agreement to what you're going to, the dowry for her. The dowry, back in early time in Egypt, they used to pay, from the early time, it's 1 kilo of gold from the early time. We talk about 7,000 years. Kilo of gold between the husband, he preferred it to his wife.
We're gonna meet this girl family. They will send a representative to go there from the family members to go there and meet. If those family agree on, okay, for you to come to discuss the matter, then okay, they give you guys time.
The groom-to-be had a set of gifts that he and his team bring to the family. And those gifts in particular are intended to really show appreciation. Not to buy the bride-to-be, but to show appreciation to the parents for having taken a very good care of their daughter and raised her to the point now that she's getting married.
The man and the friends would be hiding, and they would then grab her, basically kidnap her, and bring her to the man's hut at the home. Now, once enters through that door, the man's hut, and they usually lay down like a mat, which is made out of sack. And if they can bring that girl in and put her down on that mat, the minute she sits down on that mat, she's considered married.
And this calabash is filled with liquor, drinks. These are things that the uncles have mentioned that this is what they would like to see in the first demand. And then there's this cloth, which is a traditional cloth from my ethnic group, my dad's side, that will be part of this too. And they'll bring it, and sometimes there's an amount of money attached to it.
Have to prepare for her all she needs, clothes and all the expense. The man, he have to handle this. For man, it's very expensive, a big expense wedding for him to prepare the marriage. When it comes to the wedding, when the wedding for both, yes, they have to be part 70% or 80% of the man, he have to cover the wedding, 20% for his wife.
And the time when you come, you have to be prepared, because the door, when they come to the door, it's hard for you to get in until you put if they create $1,000 or $3,000, $5,000 in the door, you have to put it. If you don't put it, they don't allow you inside.
With that process of the kwanjula, or the introduction, being done and the gifts being exchanged, there is a series of ritualistic conversations that carry on, and for the whole process it may take anywhere between 2 hours to 4 hours. For some it is shorter, but the end result is that the families now have met each other, have made a commitment to share their children,